Okay guys, so welcome to the most thorough and definitive video comparing two of Shimano's cheapest DC reels, and those reels of course are going to be your Curado DC and your SLX DC. Now on paper both of these reels look very similar, but yet the Curado DC cost a lot more than the SLX, coming in at $250, while the SLX comes in at $190. So that's a $60 price gap between the two, and that's a lot of money. With $60 you can buy a lot of quality fishing line, you can buy a bunch of lures, or you can buy yourself a budget bait finesse reel from China. So basically in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all the things that I found the same between the two, and more importantly I'm going to go over all the differences I found between the two based on my experience owning these reels since they first came out. And then of course it's going to be up to you whether you want to spend the extra money on the Curado or save that money and go with the SLX. So let's start off with the basic similarities. Now both of these reels will feature aluminum frames with graphite side plates. Both of them come in 3 different gear ratios, a regular gear, a high gear, and an extra high gear. And more importantly, both of them come with Shimano's IDC4 digital braking system. Now the question is, since the Curado costs so much more than the SLX, did Shimano engineer anything different in the SLX's braking system to make it cast any different than the Curado DC? Basically, I was wondering if the SLX DC would not cast as good as the Curado, because you don't want your cheaper reels outcasting your more expensive reels. Now before we go into that answer, let's go over the brake system real quick. Now both reels have only 4 brake settings to choose from. You got your number 1 setting for extreme distance in perfect conditions with heavy aerodynamic lures. You got your number 2 for braid and mono. You got your number 3 for your fluorocarbon lines, and then you got your number 4 for windy conditions and for skipping. And the Curado DC has the exact same brake settings. And what's the same between these two is that you do not want to mix and match lines with different line modes, I found out. So if you're running fluorocarbon and all of a sudden you want to flip over to the braid or mono setting, you're going to have problems. And if you're running braid or mono and you want to go over to the fluorocarbon setting for whatever reason, you're going to run into problems, at least in my experience. Now all lines will work in the number 4 position since it is the strongest braking profile. So let's get on to the most important part of this comparison. Is there a difference in casting performance? Okay, so let's talk about the braid mono mode first. Now in the braid mono setting, both of these reels can cast an extremely long distance. But the question is, since the Curado is more expensive, does it cast farther than the SLX? And I'm going to say the answer is going to be no. And let me explain why. Now I have taken both of these reels a few months ago out to the field to do a measured cast battle. And technically, yes, the Curado DC won that battle, but the margin of victory was very small, somewhere like I think 3 feet or something like that. And that could have been due to the fact that it was hot and humid that day, and I cast the Curado first, and by the time I got to the SLX I was very tired and drained. Now the cast footage you see here I shot just the other day, and I'm using 12-pound mono, casting I believe a half-ounce spook, and on this day it seemed that the SLX was actually casting the farther distances more consistently, and one cast actually hit the other side of the bank there. So There is literally no difference in cast distance in the real world, in my opinion. Any kind of difference in distance can be attributed to things like, a difference in cast stroke, maybe the wind kicked up mid-cast, or maybe your release point was a little bit different, etc., etc. Now, I will tell you guys this, both of these reels will probably require some fiddling with the spool tension in order to get the most consistent overrun control in the Braid Mono mode. Now, in the fluorocarbon mode, both of these reels are actually very excellent. They can handle fluorocarbon with the spool tension setting just like Shimano recommends, which is just to minimize the side-to-side play. And they both control fluorocarbon in that mode very well, and they can actually cast lures pretty far in that mode as well. And I saw no difference in cast distance. Now, in the wind and skipping mode, both of these reels are pretty damn near unbacklashable when doing regular casts. And if you're trying to skip, they are both very, very forgiving and very capable. So if you're a beginner to skipping or a noob like me, both of these reels will flatter your amateur skipping skills. And if you do actually do a bad skip where the lure doesn't hit the water just the right way, the spool will not explode and end your fishing day. Now, when it came to pitching, once again, both of these reels were pretty much exactly the same. They're very capable pitchers with average weight lures. Now, both of them will probably struggle with your lighter lures because the spools are so heavy, but I saw no difference in distance or spool control when pitching with both of these reels. And here's some good news for you guys who are worried about having a digital chip inside your reel. Both of these reels, IDC4 brake units, are completely waterproof, which I've proven on 2 occasions where I dunked the side plate of the Curado in the water for 10 seconds. And I also dunked the entire SLX DC in the water for like 20 seconds. And both of them are fine and work perfectly right after I dunked them. So you can probably tell by now that based on my experience, I find no difference in the performance of these reels, whether it be long distance casting, spool control, pitching, skipping, etc., etc. And of course the reason is that both of these reels have the exact same brake systems with the exact same brake modes, and also the fact that they pretty much have the exact same spool except for the color. And both of these spools are relatively heavy and they weigh the same, they have the same line capacity, and they have the same single hole drilled into them. There's the one on the Curado, and there's the one on the SLX. So of course with the same spool, dimensions, weight, same braking system, they perform exactly the same. And ergonomically, they're about the same as well for the most part. They palm roughly the same. They're the same size, pretty much the same weight. I think the Curado is 0.2 of an ounce heavier, and it's nothing you can notice out on the water. So let's go over what I found to be different between the two. Now the first thing is, spec wise, the Curado DC does have 2 more ball bearings. I believe it does have better components. Now I think the handle and drag star are machined from forged aluminum, while on the SLX I'm not sure if the handle is machined or stamped, but the drag star is graphite. The Curado DC does come in slightly higher gear ratios as well, but another thing I noticed about the Curado DC is that it is a more, I guess, well-built, well-engineered reel versus the SLX. The finish of the paint feels much better. It's got this satiny gloss finish, not quite shiny gloss, but it's very, very nice to touch. While the SLX has this almost raw finish, kind of like the base SLX. While it does feel nice, it's not as nice as the Curado. So that's something to consider, when you're fishing all day long. And the thumb bar on the Curado is much better designed. It has no mush or wiggle. It is very smooth in action. So very, very nice feeling thumb bar for the Curado. Now with the SLX, and I'm not sure if this is all the SLX DCs or if it's just mine, but there is a slight bit of play in the thumb bar when it's not engaged and when it's engaged. It's very little, but I tend to press on the thumb bar really hard, and I can definitely feel that. So it's not quite as well built or refined as the Curado when it comes to the thumb bar, and that's important because you make 1,000 casts, you're going to press the thumb bar 1,000 times. Now I will say that the grip on the SLX thumb bar does lend to, I guess, more consistent long distance casting in my experience because of the way that I put my thumb on the thumb bar and the spool at the same time. Alright, so here's one major difference that I'm going to go over, and that is the smoothness and refinement during the retrieve. Now this is kind of funny because if you just take the SLX and crank the handle and then pick up the Curado and crank the handle, the SLX actually feels smoother right now, and that's because I believe the handle tolerance is a little bit better, and particularly the knob tolerance on my SLX. There is no in and out play on these knobs, while on my Curado, disappointingly, for a $250 reel, there is a lot of play in and out on these knobs, and that detracts from the smoothness. But once you get out on the water and you start throwing some big resistance baits, like I guess deep diving cranks, maybe some smaller swim baits, some big double bladed spinner baits, because the Curado has the micro module gears and it has X ship, which is the double bearing pinion, which the SLX DC does not have. When you get some kind of resistance and crank this handle, the Curado suddenly feels more precise, but at the same time more buttery smooth. So it's hard to explain. So I guess because of the X ship and the micro module gears, when you combine those two and you put some resistance on the line like I was doing here with this double willow spinnerbait, you can feel that the Curado was more precise yet smoother as well versus the SLX. Now granted, these are both two different gear ratios, but I tried not to focus on, I guess, the cranking power aspect, but just the smoothness, and that's where the Curado is better than the SLX. And that's saying something because the SLX, you know, is super smooth. It's just as smooth as any other reel out there except for these micro module X-ship Shimanos. So to wrap this video up, I guess the best way to put it is that if you just want that DC casting experience, meaning, you know, the long distance casts, the ability to cast into the wind, the skipping, etc., plus that DC sound, and you don't care about anything else, I would say save the money and go for the SLX, of course. Now if you want that Curado cachet, and yes, the Curado name does come with a cachet with it, as well as a slightly more refined cranking experience, then go with the Curado. But is the Curado $60 better than the SLX? I guess that's going to be up to you to decide. So if you guys know anyone who is in the market for either of these reels and they can't decide, just point them to this video. And I know right now you can save quite a bit of money on both, and it makes both of these reels a lot more accessible to a lot more people. Alright guys, thanks a lot.